Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Coming up, US President Donald Trump suggests that Ukraine may be Russian someday, sending a stark message to the war-torn country that's been battling Russia's full-scale invasion for almost 3 years. More on that in just a moment. But first, tonight's headlines. President Trump slams 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. Will Europe hit back? The EU sets aside €200 billion for artificial intelligence. And a Polish billionaire is tasked with putting together the government's plans to slash red tape. US President Donald Trump says Ukraine may or may not be Russian someday, while demanding $500 billion worth of rare earths from Kyiv to pay for Washington's support. It comes as US officials continue talks with top Russian diplomats over ending the war in Ukraine. Franciszek Pilis has more.
Less than half a year ago, unconditional US military aid to Ukraine was a given for Kyiv.
The United States strongly supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Nowadays, however, it looks like the new US administration isn't as keen on financing Kyiv's defensive efforts as the previous one, demanding payment for all the help that was given to date in case Ukraine loses the war.
You know, they may make a deal, they may not make a deal, they may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday, but we're going to have all this money in there, and I say I want it back. And I told them that I want the equivalent, like $500 billion worth of rare earth, and they've essentially agreed to do that. So at least we don't feel stupid. Otherwise, we're stupid.
These so-called rare earths are extremely rare elements and minerals like lithium and titanium that are vital to manufacturing modern technologies such as batteries and equipment for the aerospace and medical industries. And Ukraine accounts for 7% of the world's reserves. Since Donald Trump's inauguration, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has been using the prospect of letting the US develop his country's resources to keep Washington on his side. And according to his most recent interview with Reuters, he's more than happy to discuss a potential deal with Trump.
If we are talking about a deal, that's what the Americans want, then let's do a deal. We are all for it. Let's do the deal. The Americans helped the most, and therefore the Americans should earn the most.
According to The Guardian, Zelensky also said that Kyiv is willing to exchange territories with Moscow, offering to give up control of Russia's Kursk region in exchange for Ukrainian territory, though he did not specify what part. While Zelensky and Trump discussed the price of American aid, American and Russian diplomats continued their talks on possible peace solutions. According to Russia's foreign ministry, Lynn Tracy, the US ambassador to Moscow, spoke with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, with one of the topics being potential peace talks on Ukraine between Moscow and Washington. Despite the ongoing dialogue, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said so far there have been no new resolutions on the issue.
We often talk about setting conditions on the battlefield in order to be able to win, whether that's fighting the deep fight to affect the close fight. And I think what we're seeing right now happening both from Washington and from Moscow is each side is trying to set conditions for the negotiating table.
While no solution has been agreed upon by all parties as of yet, negotiations continue, as Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to meet US Vice President J.D. Vance on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference later this week.
And according to a post on Donald Trump's social media, Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent will head to Ukraine to accelerate the negotiations. President Trump has also reintroduced sweeping tariffs on foreign-made steel and aluminium. That's bad news for Europe's already embattled steel industry, but America could be hit even harder. Michiel van Blommestein explains.
Making America rich again.
With the stroke of a pen, it's back. Similar to the beginning of his first term, U.S. President Donald Trump has imposed an industry-wide tariff on steel and aluminum imports.
Today I'm simplifying our tariffs on steel and aluminum so that everyone can understand exactly what it means. It's 25% without exceptions or exemptions. And that's all countries, no matter where it comes from.
The tariffs for steel will mostly impact Canada, Brazil, and Mexico. However, 4 of the top 10 countries exporting steel to the U.S. are in the European Union. The EU as a whole is the second largest steel exporter to the United States, exporting over 4 million metric tons. Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Italy are the leading steel exporters. The EU steel industry, which accounts for over 2.5 million jobs and is worth €152 billion, will be directly affected by the tariffs. The European Commission has announced that the EU will retaliate.
In my country, Poland, it's 18,000 people involved directly on steel. So this is not a good situation because the European allies still finance Ukraine fight.
On a European scale, it is not a particularly large sector, but it is based in regions that have been steadily declining for decades. The industry itself is suffering from decreasing demand.
In this already tense environment, this kind of pushes steel industry even further into crisis. So I think this is why it's difficult politically, even though economically it's not a very big industry and therefore should be very much manageable.
The main danger of the tariff is the further escalation of economic tensions that can eventually hurt U.S. industries more than their European counterparts. While American steel producers will benefit, their direct clients, including car makers, will not.
And there's roughly, for every steel producer in the US, for every steel job, there's around 20 jobs in steel using industries. And since they have to pay higher prices, they become less competitive.
Estimates indicate that an average U.S.-made car contains $6,000 to $7,000 worth of steel. A 25% tariff would mean a cost increase of $1,000 to $1,500 for the same car. And it could be more for electric vehicles, which need the extra strong steel to save on weight, which is primarily what Europe supplies. Europe also has its own trade weapons ready. Back in 2018, after Trump's first round of tariffs, Brussels responded with tariffs on U.S. goods, including bourbon, jeans, motorcycles, and other luxury goods. Those tariffs have been suspended, but can be reactivated at any moment.
Staying with this story now, and the European Commission says it will impose countermeasures to the US tariffs. So what could that include? Kazimierz Szwysiak reports from Strasbourg.
Even though it has been widely anticipated that Donald Trump would introduce tariffs on imports of some goods from the European Union, as you can imagine, nobody here in the EU was particularly thrilled about this latest decision by the US president to introduce 25% duties on the imports of steel and aluminum. Especially not European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, nor the Commissioner for Trade, Maroš Šefčovič.
Unjustified tariffs on the EU will not go unanswered. They will trigger firm and proportionate countermeasures. The EU will act to safeguard its economic interests. We will protect our workers, businesses, and consumers.
And by imposing tariffs, the US will be taxing its own citizens, raising costs for its own business, and fueling inflation. In addition, tariffs are not only harmful for the trading partners directly involved, but also risk having disruptive effects for many others, as well as the global trading system as a whole. Put simply, it is a lose-lose scenario.
While nobody is saying yet what exactly these countermeasures could be, if history is anything to go by, as this has happened before in 2018, during the previous term of office of Donald Trump, the EU could introduce counter-tariffs. But there is also another important player in all of this that the EU has to remember about. That is China.
The Chinese, who now export towards the United States, and with these new tariffs, will start dumping their steel on the European market. And that will, next to the tariffs of Trump, will really hurt our economy and our sectors.
If the EU indeed imposes counter-tariffs, we could be looking at the long-feared trade war between the US and the European Union. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who is widely viewed here in the EU as one of the stronger leaders, is urging everybody to remain calm.
We are not panicking, but we are preparing for the possible consequences of these tariffs. We, Poland, as the European Union, should respond in a balanced manner. It is certainly worth doing everything to avoid unnecessary trade or customs wars, especially among friends, because this always brings negative consequences for producers and for customers.
While it is still unclear what exactly the EU's response will be, it is rather evident that the European Union does not intend to roll over. Discussions on this issue will continue here during this session of the European Parliament throughout the week. From Strasbourg, Kazimierz Łysiak, TVP World.
The EU will pour 200 billion euros of investment into the continent's artificial intelligence sector. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made the announcement at a landmark AI safety summit in Paris. Our EU correspondent Angela Skujins has more.
The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the days are behind the continent in terms of it dragging its feet on artificial intelligence, and a new era of action is ahead of it. She made the comments when touting a €50 billion investment package targeting artificial intelligence across the continent. It comes off the back of a recently announced allocated €150 billion investment. The aim of this investment package, which will be delivered in a mix of equity and grants, is to ensure that the bloc comprising those 27 EU member states are fighting fit to compete with some of those international AI players such as the US and China. Here is what she had to say from Paris.
AI has only just begun to be adopted in the key sectors of our economy and for the key challenges of our times. And this should be Europe's focus. Bringing AI to industry-specific applications and harness its power for productivity and for people.
The EU leader made the announcement from the French capital, where leaders had convened for a Paris AI safety summit. In the past, those leaders discussed safeguards and regulations to ensure that the sector was ethical. But as we already know, that European leader wants action. The US Vice President J.D. Vance was also in attendance, and he said that if the EU did not revise some of its infamous red tape that clogs the development of the tech sector, the continent will only continue to fall behind the likes of the US and China. From Brussels, Angela Skujins for TVP World.
The US and UK refused to sign a declaration on inclusive and sustainable AI during the Paris summit. The statement was supported, though, by more than 60 countries. Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico is backing Elon Musk's moves to cut USAID support for those he claims are working against his government. Analysts are dismissing the praise for Musk as a smokescreen for political difficulties in Bratislava. But they say Musk can influence European politics through his role as the boss of social media giant X. John Todd reports.
Tens of thousands in the heart of Bratislava on Friday demanding Prime Minister Robert Fico steps down. They're angry about a policy shift aimed at pushing them closer to Moscow. In January, Fico claimed the opposition were plotting a coup. Now the Slovak leader has written to Elon Musk, who as head of the US Department of Government Efficiency has blocked billions of dollars that were funding USAID projects. Fico praised Musk's actions.
I consider it correct to contact you with a request to provide available information about subsidies and grants provided to non-governmental organizations, media and individual journalists who worked and are active in the territory of the Slovak Republic.
Analysts say the move is aimed at distracting attention from Fico's political problems.
He started speaking about the coup without presenting any evidence. He started talking about some known NGOs, external plots or being engaged in potential activities against the state. But I would just say that, those who have good memories may remember that these type of narratives we heard communists.
Tech billionaire Musk recently reaffirmed his support for Germany's far-right AfD. While experts say these pleas to Elon Musk as a US official are more a play for domestic audiences, they are concerned about the influence he can wield on European politics as head of the X platform.
I think it's both the fact that he's the wealthiest person on earth and the very close relationship with President Trump and currently his apparent determination to disrupt the U.S. government agencies and his use of X, as you said, which really pose significant risks.
Others warn now it is not just Russia who could be interfering in Europe's elections.
The issue is with all of that once we focus on the Russian disinformation and Russian influence, of course, there might be also not necessarily a Russian influence into these elections, which is, of course, the huge discussion about Elon Musk and his activities, and whether and to what extent actually the X portal can influence the results of the elections.
As Robert Fico identifies shadows at home, analysts say Europe must now be wary on several fronts.
Businessman Rafał Brzoska, a regular on the Forbes list of richest Poles, has been shoulder-tapped by Prime Minister Donald Tusk to help deregulate the market. Referred to by some as the Polish Elon Musk, Brzoska has one job: tackle burdensome regulations and bureaucracy. Sonia Agata-Bischan reports.
The Polish Prime Minister extended an invitation to businessman Rafał Brzoska to assemble a team dedicated to spearheading the deregulation of business in Poland.
Yes, I am looking at you, Mr. Rafał Brzoska. I was reading in the last days some of your statements that deregulation isn't anything hard. There just needs to be a will. And that you, in fact, know what needs to be done. Let's be concrete then. You do it.
The Polish entrepreneur, whose assets are estimated at 5.7 billion Polish zloty, that is nearly 1.4 billion euro, accepted the challenge the same day. Brzoska is the founder and CEO of Integer Capital Group, Europe's leading e-commerce delivery platform. He founded InPost, revolutionizing parcel delivery with the largest automatic pickup and delivery network in Europe, featuring over 66,000 parcel locker sites across 9 countries. With billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk recently becoming the head of the U.S. administration's Department of Government Efficiency, similarities could be drawn between the two.
It depends on how we understand the role of Elon Musk. If it is to be understood in the sense of the role which Musk is to perform in President Trump's administration, then no. But if we speak of accomplishments, then certainly yes.
Business people welcome the idea of having one of their own engage in market deregulation efforts.
I consider the idea very good because nobody can assess the things needed to run a business, the associated challenges and problems, as well as an entrepreneur. And Mr. Brzoska is an extraordinary businessman who is very fitting for this task.
The Polish Prime Minister is wasting no time in putting the market deregulation initiative into motion.
On Friday, I will meet with a team of entrepreneurs and managers under the direction of Mr. Rafał Brzoska.
The team is expected to present recommendations aimed at enhancing competitiveness. Reflecting on the Polish business environment, an expert told TVP World's Bottom Line that deregulation could involve streamlining the tax system and making tax administration more predictable.
And here we should expect some kind of simplification and making sure that taxpayers are not treated as, potential criminals, but as really providers of revenues for the budget.
Tusk is confident that Poland's presidency of the Council of the EU will be historically significant for providing the right impetus to deregulation.
As Donald Trump makes himself at home in the White House, the impact of his return is already being felt around the world, including in Ukraine. President Trump has often touted his negotiating skills, and he once promised to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine within a day of taking office. That, of course, has not happened, but is the region moving closer to peace? Joining me now is Daniel Fried, former US ambassador to Poland. Good evening, sir. Thank you for your time.
Evening. Dobry wieczór.
Let's start with President Trump saying Ukraine, and I quote, may or may not be Russian someday. What is his thinking and game plan right now?
We may know more after this weekend. There's a lot of talk that the Trump team, maybe Vice President Vance, maybe General Kellogg, the special envoy for Ukraine, will reveal more of the details of what Trump has in mind this weekend at the Munich Security Conference. We may know, but I am feeling somewhat, not entirely, but somewhat more confident that the Trump team is headed in the right direction on Ukraine. They have talked about strength, about increasing sanctions on Russia, if that's what it takes to get Putin to negotiate seriously. They're talking about security for Ukraine. I think that they have in mind something like a ceasefire along the current lines. And if this is to work, security for Ukraine must be paramount. They've also said that Europe has to carry the load, but the Europeans cannot possibly be expected to do this without serious American backup. We'll know more, but it doesn't look like the Trump administration is going to do a dirty deal with the Kremlin over the heads of the Ukrainians.
I will be there in Munich at the end of this week. It is set to be a fascinating summit. How critical do you think this could be in terms of progressing any peace talks with Ukraine and indeed with Russia?
Well, the Trump team has said for a long time that it wanted to end the war. And it could end the war on Putin's terms, which would be a disaster for Ukraine, for Europe, and actually bad for the United States. Or it could end the war on terms that favor Ukraine, meaning even if Russia is temporarily occupying 20% of Ukraine, if the rest of Ukraine is free and secure, something like West Germany during the Cold War, this would be a strategic defeat for Putin and a strategic win for Ukraine. Because if there is security for Ukraine, and the best security, of course, is NATO membership, but if there is security for Ukraine, and Ukraine can develop quickly in a post-war period, that will show that Putin's aim of restoring the Russian and Soviet Empire has failed. And that will be good for everybody, including ultimately good for Russia. But I'm looking into the future. I don't know what the Trump plan is going to be. I'm merely hopeful that it will be better than what some of us feared many months ago.
There is a lot of uncertainty around that plan, and obviously we can't read the tea leaves too much, but do you think that any Trump peace proposal will include the concession of land on behalf of Ukraine? Despite many condemning that idea, is there a sense that he feels like peace is the only way to peace is by conceding some Ukrainian land, given his deal maker, his business background?
There is a big difference between a ceasefire along the current line of contact and actually forcing Ukraine to give up its territory. It is quite possible to acknowledge a line like the line between East and West Germany during the Cold War, without ever giving up the principle of a united Ukraine or a united Germany. And I think and hope that the Trump people will understand the difference. We should not reward Putin's aggression, but if Trump wants to end the war, doing so along the current lines is one way to proceed. I think the Ukrainians would be ready for that. Not to give up their territory, but to recognize a ceasefire along the current lines if there were enough security that Putin couldn't simply rearm and restart the war in a few years.
We've touched on the Munich Security Conference, and indeed JD Vance is expected to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky on Friday in Munich. Do you feel like JD Vance could be the more moderate voice in these negotiations, or does he just turn up here with a message from the boss?
Well, JD Vance's public statements about Ukraine have not been good. He said he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine. So I have not associated him with the group of Trump people who are pushing for a settlement on favorable terms. However, having said that, J.D. Vance, it would be terrific. It would be a wonderful thing if J.D. Vance were to support a free Ukraine, a ceasefire, a free Ukraine, and security for Ukraine. Now, he is almost certainly going to demand that the Europeans carry more of the weight in defending Ukraine. But the Europeans cannot do this, as I said, without serious American backup. And I hope that's something that the US will offer.
At this current stage of the war, how important, how significant is this opportunity for Volodymyr Zelensky to be in a place where so many other world leaders are too, and again able to reiterate his message, to reiterate those pleas for support and indeed conversations around peace talks? Is this a really critical moment for him?
Sure it is. Sure it's critical. The Trump administration is about to roll out, or probably about to roll out, its peace plan for Ukraine. President Zelensky and his team have handled the Trump administration rather well. That is, they have not said no, they have found ways to say yes, and they have done so with such skill that Trump has recognized that they are not the problem, rather he has said that Putin is the problem, which is accurate. So I think Zelensky has to work with the Trump administration, always finding ways to try to agree with them, but also making clear what his bottom line is. That will take some skill, but I think that President Zelensky has done a good job so far.
And speaking of those relationships and that relationship building going on between Ukraine and the US, President Trump now indicating that American support for Ukraine has a price tag, $500 billion of mineral riches. Could an agreement in this space be Ukraine's ticket to getting and keeping Trump's support on side?
Well said. I actually like the way you framed that. Trump doesn't think the way, let's say, most Poles think, in terms of values, common security, the need to resist aggression. Trump thinks in terms of concrete, demonstrable interests. He has, or somebody has pointed out to him, that the U.S. may have an interest in Ukraine's mineral resources. Trump has said that the U.S. wants to secure its investment in Ukraine through access to developing these resources. If that's what it takes for Trump to realize that the United States has real security interests in Ukraine, well, I'm all for that. That's great. If that's his path to supporting Ukraine, fine, I'll take it and say thank you. And I noticed that the Ukrainians welcomed Trump's interest in their mineral resources because it demonstrates that Trump recognizes that Ukraine's survival as a free country is in the American interest. Trump may have his own way of getting there, but the point is that he gets there.
We didn't see peace on day one of Trump's return to office, as he promised, but what's your gut feeling? Do you feel like that a ceasefire is quite possible or even likely in the coming months, or is that too soon?
To answer, I want to think about Russia's position in the war. There is a school of thought that says that Russian victory is inevitable and it's actually winning the war. I'm not so sure this is the case. Certainly the Ukrainians are under pressure. They're tired. We know about all the Ukrainian problems. But the Russians have problems too. Their economy is stretched. Their military industry is under pressure. The casualties are high. There's all kinds of evidence that they're in trouble. Their victory is not inevitable, and we shouldn't assume it is. When I speak with Polish experts, and I really respect Polish experts on Ukraine because Polish lives depend on getting Russia right. So the Polish experts say that time may in fact be on Ukraine's side if we keep up our support for Ukraine. My sense is that they are right, that we need to keep backing Ukraine, and Putin cannot carry on with this war indefinitely. Now, I don't know that I'm right, but I would not overestimate Russian strength. We know that Russia is perfectly capable of losing wars of aggression. The Crimean War, the Russo-Japanese War, World War I, and the Afghanistan War. If we back Ukraine, Putin may realize he has to cut a deal. And therefore, we ought to back Ukraine. Poland will have a lot to say. I believe that the U.S. Defense Secretary will be in Poland for talks, meeting with American troops, I expect, and talks with the Polish government. Excellent opportunity.
Daniel Fried, former US ambassador to Poland, thank you again for your time.
My pleasure.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.